back to another episode of Journey to Life with me, ArletteJones-Lawson, and my daughter and co-host, Constance Fields. Our topic today will focus on breaking the stigma of domestic violence. We are honored today with our special guest, Stephanie J. Bonds, and her daughter, Katherine Omo-Osagie.
Yes, Stephanie J. Bond is a survivor. After experiencing personal heartbreak of unfathomable proportions, she had dedicated her life to helping others transcend through their own personal tragedy. Stephanie's husband struggled with mental illness throughout the last several years of their marriage. As his illness escalated, violence and abuse gradually crept into their home. And in 2010, her marriage ended with an attempted murder-suicide. Stephanie fought to recover from 3 nearly fatal gunshot wounds, only to discover that she was left with $25 million of debt, a bankrupt estate, and virtually no financial resources with which to raise her 4 children. Through sheer hard work, fierce determination, and unrelenting perseverance, Stephanie successfully created a new life for her family and rebuilt her career as an accounting and finance executive in corporate America.
And a little bit about Katherine. Katherine is a rising sophomore at the University of Alabama, where she is double majoring in finance and operations management. She serves as one of the official ambassadors to the university. Katherine is a graduate of the Colony High School, which is located in far north Dallas. Prior to graduation, she served as varsity cheerleading captain, a National Honor Society member, and a concurrent student on the Dean's List at Collins College. A certified USA gymnastics judge, Katherine is a former competitive trampoline gymnast and 2-time national trampoline champion. In 2021, she won the title of Miss Texas Outstanding Teen and placed second runner-up to Miss America's Outstanding Teen, where she advocated for her platform, Break the Cycle of Abuse. In 2010, when Katherine was 6 years old, her father's struggle with mental illness reached a breaking point after years of gradually increasing abuse towards her mother. On one seemingly normal afternoon, Katherine's father shot her mother 3 times before turning the gun on himself. The shooting took place in the family home while Katherine and 2 of her brothers watched TV in another part of the house. This event has shaped Katherine's life, and she has dedicated herself to being an example of a positive light after going through tremendous adversity. Katherine's achievements so far have gone against all the odds expected of her, and she plans to continue with that trajectory. Katherine aspires to break the cycle of abuse from being passed down from one generation to the next, altering assumptions about domestic violence and educating others on the signs of abusive situations. Thanks so much for being here, Stephanie and Katherine. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you.
So let's get started by examining what is domestic violence. The textbook definition of domestic violence is when someone uses physical, emotional, or sexual force or threats to control or harm another person in a close relationship. This can be a partner, ex-partner, family member, or someone who lives with or has close connections to the victim. Domestic violence is usually a pattern of abusive and dominating behavior that causes fear for the victim's safety and well-being.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty cut and dry explanation of what domestic violence is. I think a lot of times it can be a little nuanced as well. There's a lot of factors to consider. And I'm really looking forward to us diving into all of the factors. But, I was curious, Stephanie, can you briefly share a little bit about your story and what led you to your advocacy?
Sure. So a little bit about what I call that day. It was February 27th, 2010. My husband called me into the bedroom and said there was something he wanted to discuss with me, but not in front of the children. I followed him down the hallway. And when we got to our bedroom area, he turned to face me, and he always wore these hooded sweatshirts. And in the front pocket, he pulled out an object, and I immediately realized it was a gun. Before I realized, he had grabbed me and pushed me into our walk-in closet. And I remember us struggling a bit. I remember him saying, "This is all going to stop now." And the next thing that happened was he shot me. The first bullet went through my left foot, and I reacted, "Oh my gosh, you just shot me." I think I couldn't believe that my husband of almost 22 years just did that, right? And before I even realized, before I knew the next thing I knew is I was face down on the carpet. My face was buried in the carpet. And after a few seconds, I realized I had been shot a second time. Again, I fell so fast, I didn't even know what had happened. And then there was a third shot that went through my right hip and exited my groin. The next thing I remember was I heard him fiddling with the gun. I was certain that the next bullet would probably be a fatal shot in the back of my head. Instead, he put the gun in his mouth, fired, fell next to me, and died. The children were in another part of the house. The first thing I did is I wanted to protect them. I wanted to shield them from the carnage. And my cell phone had fallen at some point during the struggle. So I tried to lift up on my elbows to go crawl to crawl to the cell phone. And I couldn't move. And it was at that point I knew that I was in trouble. So I started screaming for help. And my children heard my cries. My then 14-year-old son went to the house phone and dialed 911. And then Katherine, who was then 6 at the time, ran down the hall. I asked her to look for my cell phone so I could reach for help. I asked her not to look at what was right in front of her. She found my cell phone. She brought it to me, and my kids saved my life. I dialed 911. I got to the 911 dispatch, and they told me that another call had come in from the residence. It took them about 15-20 minutes to get to me. And once the paramedics arrived, they assessed the damages. They transported me to the hospital. That second bullet had blown out about 1.5 inches of my femur and grazed my femoral artery. And so the first surgery that I had once I arrived at the hospital was a vein graft to repair that artery. I was later told that when I got to the hospital, I had about 1/3 of my blood left. I almost bled out. And, it was a life-saving operation. I was in the hospital for a month. I had numerous surgeries. I eventually graduated to a wheelchair for a month, then a walker, and a cane, and I had a year of physical therapy. Basically learned how to, rebuild strength. I had balance issues. I'm very, very fortunate, very lucky. And I think every day I appreciate how lucky I am, because you only have to turn on the news and see that people die of injuries far less severe than mine were every day. And you see other domestic violence stories in the media. And I'm one of the lucky ones. Most women don't survive. So because I've been given this God-given opportunity, my passion to share my story in hopes that it'll help other women, it's become a mission of mine.
Wow, amazing, amazing. That's such bravery as well. Would you like to briefly share your story from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I was only 6 when the shooting took place. So I remember a lot more from that day than I think a lot of people would expect a 6-year-old to remember. But from what I remember just growing up, I remember we were such a prominent family. You know, my dad was kind of the American dream. I mean, he had been an immigrant from Nigeria. He came to the US, came to the University of Illinois, met my mom. They built this family, they built this business, and everybody kind of knew us. And when I was younger, I was very much like, I loved attention. So I was the youngest. I always got this attention from my brother's friends, like, and I kind of relished in that. But I also knew that on the flip side, we weren't near as stable as everybody thought. You know, we have all these nice cars and this big house, but behind those doors, there's all of these things that are happening that nobody really knows about. So the day of the shooting, I remember going to work with my mom. I was literally attached to her hip. Like, she pulled me out of preschool so I could hang out with her all the time. Like, we were inseparable and pretty much still are. And, you know, we were at the office. They had gotten into an argument, and that was routine. My parents always fought. So we went home, and I remember feeling really scared when we got to the house, just because, you know, no little kid likes to see their parents fight. And I remember we left the office before my dad did, but my dad had beat us to the house. And so I remember asking my mom, why is dad here? He left after us. I was very confused and I was scared. And she was trying to calm me down and just, you know, reassure me everything's going to be okay. And then, you know, we walked into the house. I went and sat on the couch with my brothers, and then they went back into the closet. And, you know, we were sitting there. I think my brother was making us a snack or something. And we were watching TV, and we didn't hear any gunshots, but we heard my mom scream. And it was like a horror movie type of scream. Like, it echoed through the whole house. It was terrible. Like, that's one of those things that, like, it happens and you never forget it. So I heard that scream, and I immediately ran down because I was so worried about my mom. I didn't know what was going on. I just wanted to get to her. And so I ran down to the bedroom, couldn't find her, was in the bedroom, turned, couldn't find her, still in the bedroom. And then I go to the closet, and I see her face down as if she was trying to crawl out of the closet. And she immediately said, "Don't look, find my phone." And, you know, of course you look when you're looking for something. And so I kind of saw that scene, but I ended up like getting her phone, and then she called 911. I ran back down the hallway. I told my brother, we need ambulances. And after that, you know, the police came, they escorted us out of our house. And the thing about our house too, is it was a big house and it was in the middle of the woods. And so our driveway was about probably a quarter mile long, a half mile long. There's 3 kids in the house, but when something like that happens, you can't take anything. So one of us didn't have shoes, one of us didn't have a jacket, and then the other of us didn't have shoes or a jacket. And so we weren't able to take anything, and we walked all the way down the driveway, and we were put in a police car. And I was such a kid who like didn't comprehend bad things, that I was very much calmer than what I think a lot of people expect. So I literally got into the police car with my brothers, and I laid on one of them and I took a nap. And that was that. Next thing I knew, there were people coming in to check on us, family members and family friends who had, obviously you could see the scene at our house. And they were trying to get us. They wouldn't let anybody take us. And then eventually we went to the police station, and we spent a good amount of time there giving statements, explaining everything. And then that day ended with us ending up going to the hospital to see my mom after she had that first surgery. And at that point, she was in the ICU. And so that was kind of the day from my perspective.
I have one thing I want to add to this. After I healed, I was able to get the police transcripts of what happened and the interviews with the kids. And I will tell you, as a parent, there is nothing more heartbreaking than reading your children's statements after an event like that. I mean, you want to read something that will truly crush you. Just read if you get a hold of police transcripts after some sort of domestic violence event, read those.
Wow.
Yeah, I know from just being a parent of 4, I've heard somebody say once, a great parent can only be as happy as their least happiest kid. And so
Absolutely.
I can imagine reading their statements and just feeling all of the pain because you absorb everything as a mom. Wow.
You know, and one of the things I'll say to this is people always ask me why I stayed. And I think for so many women, there's no right answer. You're in a no-win situation. You know, I grew up in a very traditional Christian family where divorce was the last resort. And yes, my husband had mental illness. And so it had escalated to such a severe state that we had reached a point where he needed to get the proper help. And I had given him an ultimatum where I want you to get off the prescription medications that are not helping you. I want you to get a qualified therapist. I want you to get a good doctor, go to an in-house facility if need be, and we can keep this family together. But this is a situation, right? We had reached that breaking point as a family where I couldn't manage it. We were married for 22 years. We built a business together. We had 4 children. And all I wanted was to get my husband back, the man that I married, and the man that was a good father in the early years that had later become a not so good father. I was really hoping this was a hiccup in our marriage and that we could get back to how it used to be.
Yeah. So those are both really powerful perspectives. And thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. I know this question will kind of, I mean, you could elaborate on this, Stephanie, but recognizing the warning signs of abuse. So with domestic violence, there are patterns and behaviors that the abuser uses to gain and assert control. And so some of those would be using coercion and threats, using intimidation, emotional abuse, economic abuse. For men, male privilege, using children, isolation, and also minimizing, denying, and blaming. Did you recognize any specific signs?
So yes and no. That is one of those questions that's always asked and it doesn't have a definitive answer. There's a woman I respect here in Dallas. She's the CEO of Genesis Women's Shelter and Support, and I serve on the alliance board of that organization. And at one of our meetings recently, she said so many times there aren't warning signs that are recognizable. It's always, hindsight, right? You just like, oh, well, yeah, there was this and there was that happened. In my situation, I would say the changes took place very incrementally. There were baby steps of control. And they could always be rationalized. So there would be one thing, I know, like with respect to our assets, my name would be taken off one of our properties. And let me backtrack. We had a real estate business on the University of Illinois campus. We owned student housing. And at the time of my husband's death, we were one of, I'd say, the top 5 largest landlords on that campus. We bought our first building after we were married. I am a CPA by profession, so I did a lot of the bookkeeping and the accounting and finance. So my names were gradually taken off the assets, and there was always a business reason. It was always some sort of an LLC structure or something the lender required, something to protect me if he had a personal guarantee. There were logical reasonings in the early stages, and then something else would creep in. And then there'd be something else and something else. And I think for me, and this is also a pattern for so many other women that find themselves in an abusive relationship. By the time they realize what's happened, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
The outside world can see this, but we living in the day-to-day can't. And I think in our family dynamic, I had 4 children and 4 travel sports. I would take care of payroll. I would take care of paying bills. I would take care of the basics just to get through the day, to get everything done that needed to be done. And there was a period of time early in our marriage, I totally trusted my husband's decision-making. I don't know that magical moment when there was a shift and I couldn't trust him anymore, but those were the rules with which I entered the marriage. And that was what I knew. And so when that shifted, that changed, I wasn't able to recognize that. Now, there were people looking at the dynamics of our marriage from the outside that recognized that, but I couldn't see it. And so when you see this warning sign question, it's a conundrum for so many women that are living in this, because again, there might be a logical reason, there might be a way to rationalize. It's just impossible in so many situations for a woman to see it while it's happening. And then when she does realize it, she tries to reach out for help. And because everybody else thinks she's been ignoring this, they don't always listen to her. That, from my perspective, is when they should be listening to her the most.
Absolutely.
She now gets it.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, personally, from my own domestic violence relationship, I know that you go into it, feeling, this influx of attention, of love, and you're, treated like so well initially. And then, it may come to, criticisms here and there, looks about, how you present yourself, just little things gradually that are said and happen to kind of wear down your self-esteem to the point that you believe this person who you trust to love you the most. And so you don't always see it. And I heard a phrase the other day, actually, that said, sometimes rose-colored glasses can prevent us from seeing the red flags.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And we always want to think the best of them, and we always want to feel like we can change them, and not that this is the previews of coming attraction. You know what I mean?
And I think too that we tend to think that, at least in the early stages, when there's something that happens, it's a one-off. It's like, this isn't going to happen again, or there's an apology, or for whatever reason, okay, there was a mistake made. I want to preserve the family. I'm not walking out the door because of this one bad event. So there's a one-off. Then there's another one-off. And then there's another one-off. And then pretty soon we have a pattern. But we have so much at stake, so much to lose. I heard it again with respect to Genesis. There was an event, and Nicole Kidman was our keynote speaker, and she was the guest speaking about Big Little Lies. For people that haven't seen it, it's a great story about a prominent family and domestic violence. Was Nicole Kidman's character was abused by her husband. And what she said was playing that role opened her eyes. And what she discovered when she was preparing for the role is that so many women, if it's 80% good and 20% bad, women will rationalize the 20% bad as the cross they have to bear, the burden they have to, take on to preserve the family unit. And so there's almost a disassociation with the actual abuse that's taking place, because that is the price that they have accepted that they have to pay to keep the family unit intact. And it's for the sake of the children. And I thought that was so enlightening to have it explained that way, because that was truly my mindset, especially at the end.
Rationalizing is, they say rational lies, right? So you're trying to make sense of what you're being told or the things you're experiencing. And how could this possibly be what I'm experiencing?
Right.
All right. Well, one of the other aspects of abuse comes in the form of love bombing. And love bombing can show up in the very beginning stages of a relationship. It's often even romanticized on TV and in film. And it's where, you have somebody who is pursuing somebody else relentlessly, and the other person is not interested at all. But then they get worn down with all the gifts and the, flowers and the calls and the texts, and they're finally like, okay, we can go out, And that is actually, according to Psychology Today, an attempt to influence another person with over-the-top displays of attention and affection. That kind of behavior is a form of emotional abuse. And it can be experienced at any stage of a relationship, but it's definitely a red flag for the beginning stages that it's not going to be a healthy setup. Katherine, do you have a perspective of love bombing?
Well, absolutely. And, I've never really heard it explained like that. And, I'm turning 20 this year. So I've had my experiences with, different guys, especially in high school. And one of the things that comes to mind when I hear that definition is, the first boyfriend I ever had. He was this great person, and he is a great person, but I was not always the most interested. And so I remember him kind of like doing that, like relentless, like, just give me a chance, give me a shot. What, like texting, calling, and we were really good friends. And I was like, you know what? Fine, like whatever. And lo and behold, of course, the relationship lasted about 2 months, and it was not a good relationship at all.
Yeah.
But I also think when you grow up without a very positive experience or a good example of what a healthy, happy relationship looks like, I think that takes a massive toll.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that I've definitely had to acknowledge about myself and learn to work through. And I think that's a perspective that gets lost, especially from the children who go through these situations. This happened when I was 6 years old. So I've never had an example of what a healthy marriage looks like, what a healthy relationship looks like, what something should have, like what is too far, what is like all of these different things. And learning how to navigate that. And, I'm still learning, like, of course it's a learning process that you have to learn for anybody. But it's a little more emphasized, I guess is the word. And when you grow up in a situation that my family grew up around.
Yeah. Do you find yourself being in relationships where you're like, oh, they're paying me attention, or they're showing me affection, or they're showing, this to me, and it may feel good, and then it turns out to be not?
Well, what I've had to be very cautious of is, of course, at the beginning stages of a relationship, you're kind of blind to all of the things that maybe aren't the best. You might see something and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to let that slide because X, Y, Z. And that's been something that I've definitely realized about myself. Like I'm prone to let things slide because I want to have that healthy relationship that I think of course I think everybody has.
Right.
So learning to not let things slide as much. And if I see something, acknowledging that I see it, not turning a blind eye to it, and understanding you can't let things slide to have the relationship that you want. You have to find somebody who you don't have to let anything slide for.
Yeah.
That's less, I'm very grateful to know that I have the self-awareness to see that. Because I don't want to end up in a relationship where, history repeats itself. I'm very grateful for the examples I have in my life and for a lot of the open communication that my mom and I have too. I can go to her about any of those different situations. And of course, she's got a perspective that's about 36 years older than mine. So she's able to kind of tell me, like, you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to warn you, X, Y, Z. So it's been very, very beneficial to have that open line of communication with her so that she can also give me her perspective. I might not always listen to it because 19-year-old girl, but
yeah, I'm so glad you said it that way. It's you're right, it does get lost. And in my own personal life, I've not had an experience with abuse in that way. but when I was dating my husband and we were engaged, he had a lot of growing to do, and he's still growing, emotional intelligence, we're still learning. But there were a lot of signs of his own abuse that were showing up and how he reacted to situations. And my mom played an integral role in helping in the beginning him see that, hey, she's not backing you into a corner. It's okay to talk out these feelings. It's okay, so that it doesn't turn into something where he's lashing out at me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too, I've always had to be I've been very proactive about how I handle my emotions and how I present myself and I carry myself, especially to people who I might, have a friendship with or have a relationship with, because I think it helps me to be open about anything that has happened in my family. So should something happen, they know what they're not getting themselves into, but like they know why I handle certain situations or why I react the way that I do. But I'm also very proactive in feeling those emotions and making sure that I'm as logical as I can be, even though all of these things have happened.
Right, because you want to check the filter that you're seeing a situation through, to make sure that you are not overreacting to a situation, and to make sure that you're at the same time not continually erasing your line in the sand. And they push, you move it further out. They push, you move it further out. You want to be mindful of the fact that your line should be your line. And there should be certain things that you don't excuse. And it doesn't matter whether the person is wonderful, certain things you can't excuse, because if you start moving your line, then they know that it's movable. Exactly. They know it's not permanent, it's not fixed, it's movable. So I think that the relationship that you and your mom have is just wonderful, and to have grown together and strong through this, and and to have such a strong mom as an example of how to overcome, and also an example of what it looks like to be abused. I think that is absolutely wonderful.
Can I talk about that love bombing?
Yeah,
real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay, no, that's fine. In all honesty, this was not a term I was familiar with until I read the outline of today. And I had to really think about whether or not that was present in our relationship. And if so, how would I have defined that? In the early years of our relationship, we didn't have any money. So he didn't buy me gifts. I mean, we were best friends and we were inseparable. I mean, he would go to class with me. I would go to class with him. We'd study together. I mean, we were we had a close friendship. And to me, that was what I always wanted. I wanted my partner in life to be my best friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to love bombing, I think that probably happened much later when we had children. And it was the lifestyle that we had of the homes where all of the, my oldest son played football. So the football team would come over and I'd make them breakfast on a Saturday morning after they'd spent the night after a Friday night football game. We had the toys, we had trampoline, we had four-wheelers, we had great cars. And I think the love bombing came once our family was established, because it wasn't just me leaving, but I was also disrupting the lifestyle of the children. Mm-hmm. And that also made it harder for me to made it harder for me to leave.
Yeah.
Because, and so I think, back earlier, you said that it can happen at any stage of a marriage or any stage of a relationship.
Right.
Yeah, I think I was a victim of that. I didn't realize it. Mm-hmm. And I'm still discovering and learning things about how deep the control really was. But I think that was certainly a part of it. It was, he had access to all the financial resources. And there was also the perception that if I left, I was throwing away a wonderful lifestyle for my children. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I would have had support of our friends and our family, even those that knew part of what was taking place behind closed doors, because there was so much at stake if I walked. So anyhow.
No. That's such a great example of the definition that Constance was sharing with us, because I don't think that people realize that it can, that it can happen, at any point during the relationship. It doesn't have to always be at the beginning. And you pointing that out, I think is going to be like a huge help, because it'll help people to see. And you think about the fact that you were part of building this family and building this business and building this life and of prestige. You think of that, and you think of what not just walking away will do to you as far as losing out, but as far as your children may not living the life that they've been accustomed to. And so I think it actually makes it a little harder when love bomb happens midway through a relationship as opposed to at the beginning, because I think at the beginning it can feel a little bit suffocating. But midway through, I think that I think it's important to emphasize that it can happen at any point, and there are added things that you take into consideration before you make the decision to walk away. That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about the effects of domestic violence on children. Now, womenshealth.gov talks about children who witness domestic violence or are victims of abuse themselves are at serious risk for long-term physical and mental health problems. Children who witness violence between parents may also be at greater risk of being violent in their future relationships. So speaking about the short-term effects of domestic violence, Katherine, I think that you are probably in a better position to speak to this of all of us. Would you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will say is I'm a very logical person, and coming, turning 20 this year, I've looked back at kind of how I grew up and different things that I experienced and the ways I handled things. And I didn't realize that for a very long time, the way that I was living was the way I was living was because of the way I grew up. And there were a lot of different things that I used to do that some people would think like, oh, why would you ever do that? That's such a silly thing to do. Or why wouldn't you do that? And it was just because it was an effect of growing up in a house, or not even growing up, but going through that experience that I went through. And I remember, I think I was probably 16 or 17, and I was at school, and, it was when I was really starting to get into working with Genesis Women's Shelter and doing a lot of advocating for abuse prevention. And my mom and I found this form, and it had a list of different signs that kids were experiencing or kids were witnessing abuse. Because it's hard when you're a kid that you're witnessing something like that, because one, it's all you don't know what a real healthy marriage is supposed to look like, because that's all you've been seeing. And then two, you're not being hit, you're not being abused, so you're just seeing these things happen, so nobody really knows what to do, because you're just a bystander at that point.
Right.
On this form, it said, one of the things that kids who live through abuse, one of the things that they'll do or they won't do is like, they don't know how to take care of themselves well. And one of them was like they don't know how to brush their teeth, or they don't regularly brush their teeth, things like that. And I remember not consistent, like, this sounds gross, but it's like, I never consistently brushed my teeth until I was older than like, you're already in that routine. And I just remember not seeing the importance of it. I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, I never got cavities. My teeth were healthy. So I was like, who cares? Like, it doesn't affect me. But looking back on it, the reason that it's things like that, they don't take care of themselves, they don't have good hygiene, is because in those formative years, when your parents are supposed to be teaching you how to take care of yourself, brush your teeth twice a day, shower this many times, do this, do that, they're trying to save their family, and they're trying to protect
Mhm.
themselves. They're trying to save the money. They're trying to protect their kids from seeing all of these things. And so I was never taught how to do those basic things because there was so many other things going on. And what was really interesting too is I had this friend in high school, and she was stellar student. I'm like top of our class, put together family, nice house. Just this girl had everything going on for her. Smartest girl I've ever met. And I told her about this form, and I was just kind of talking to her, and she was like, that's really interesting because I was the exact same way. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, did you have like what are you talking about? Because I'm talking about like abuse in my family. And she was like, no, like I've gone through some things like this, and the things that you're talking about, the things that you didn't know how to do, it's the exact same things that I did. And everybody thought I was so weird for not knowing to brush my teeth as many times. But nobody ever taught me, because when you're trying to save your kids from watching that, that's the last thing that's on your mind.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. That is very interesting when you put it in that perspective. I personally had never thought that those little things could be signs that that's what's going on. There's some kind of correlation there, and I'm a therapist, so my therapist's brain was working while you were talking. But there was something in there that you said about not regularly brushing your teeth because it's like, whatever, it doesn't matter. It reminded me of there being some kind of correlation there with the relationship that you were witnessing with your parents too. Like, it doesn't matter. They don't care. So, so that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that perspective.
Of course.
Yeah. And I think too that, you're sharing that perspective is also like eye-opening for children out there who, do feel, an indifference to certain things. And I think it's important to know that it's not just that they don't care because they feel like their parents don't really care. I think also it's that they don't know how. Like you learn how to do things because you've been taught and you witnessed it. And if that hasn't been like on the forefront or at the top of your parents' priority list, you're not going to know how to do it. And I think a lot of kids too, when they have sleepovers, can feel a lot of anxiety from, oh my goodness, let me just watch and see what they are doing, what I should be doing, because I don't know, you know what I mean? So I think that was such an amazing perspective. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Okay, just to elaborate a little bit on what Kat said, I've had an awareness over the last few years in the conversations that Kat and I have had that I really was an absentee parent. I think during the turmoil of the last few years of the marriage, and then certainly after, she will say things that I literally have no memory of. I have absolutely no recollection. I know there was a period of time where I was literally a zombie, for lack of a better word. I would get up, I would get the kids ready for school, I would do my best to get them to the bus stop, I would come back, I would go to bed, I would kind of fall apart. I would try to discipline myself to get certain things done while they were at school. But I certainly wasn't very productive. I didn't have the capacity to do what I needed to do as a mother. And I've said this many times in many different situations. What I have the hardest time forgiving my former husband for is not so much the physical harm, but it was the fact that he took away my ability to be a good mother to my children, because I was a far different mother to the older two than I was the younger two. Because when the younger two came along, when my third child was born, he was starting to have mental problems. By the time Katherine came along, I mean, I guess I didn't realize how far gone he was. And I was constantly trying to manage and keep everybody in check, manage the household. I also fell into this false narrative that as long as I was present, I was a stabilizing force for him. And his family would tell me that. You can't leave him. You can't, we know it's bad, but you can't do anything about this. Because if you do, it's all going to fall apart. You know, he might take his own life. What are you going to do with the children? You know, you are the bedrock that keeps everything intact. So I had this enormous pressure, this enormous burden of responsibility. And I believed it because I was fed that. And I also knew how he would snap if I, you know, even discussed the fact that this can't go on the way it is. So
it sounds like your family also played a hand in keeping you in a codependent relationship.
His family for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I reached out to my mother's response was something other than what I was expecting it to be. You know, I was expecting my mama to be like, where is he? Let me go, you know, to take care of him. But it was like, no, you know, it'll be okay. You know, I think you should, you know, just work through it. And, you know, those kind of comments. And then it makes you feel like when you speak out, when you reach out, there's not going to be any help.
No, right.
You know, so what's the point? I mean, it almost feels like, what's the point? And speaking to what you were talking about, Stephanie, as far as, you know, being an absentee parent, after my divorce from my first husband, and I was a single mama with Constance for, you know, such a long time, quite a few years. And I'm an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And I know that Dr. Phil don't watch a lot of Dr. Phil, but I did watch a few episodes. And one of the episodes, he said, you know, sometimes you have to rise above your raisin. And I was like, rise above your raisin. Oh yeah. And I was, you know, that made me feel better, you know. Yeah, oh man, I had to rise above my raisin. I had to, you know, pick up and move forward and be better. And then it hit me one day, oh my God, my children have to rise above me because I'm an adult person that have experienced these things, and that's affecting how I'm parenting. And so I remember with Constance, I don't know, she might have been 19 or 20. I called her up one day and I was like, look, I want you to write down everything you think I ever did to you, everything, every mistake you think I ever made, any way I've ever hurt you, just write it all down. And we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be in a safe place. I'm not going to blow up or be angry. There'll be some things that I'll apologize for. There'll be things that I'll say, well, I really wouldn't do it different because X, Y, Z. But we need to have that conversation. And it was because I recognized that, for her, poor Constance was the only child for almost 13 years. For her, I wasn't the type of parent that I felt like I needed to have been. And so there's a lot of, I think can be a lot of guilt that comes from that. But I think being open and talking about it and recognizing it, I think helps with, the relationship bonding, and I can see with you and your daughter. And so that's really powerful.
I think we're going through that phase now a little bit, Kat.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think the conversation, she's now mature enough, she can, she shares things with me. And a lot of things I just have no awareness that this is how things affected her, or this is, this was our situation through her lens. And, I'm sorry, you know, and I think I've said this to her a lot. I'm sorry. I wish it was different. I do know that I did the best I could given the situation we were in. This is far from perfect. And I think also knowing our past and our history, I'm still so thankful that we've come out reasonably okay.
Yes.
So it's a balancing act. It's, you know, there's no manual for this.
Right. There really isn't. And there are actually long-term effects as well for children.
Well, ladies, this has been a eye-opening conversation and helpful, I think, to so many. And we just feel honored to have y'all's presence on our podcast.
Thank you.
And so with that, I want to say thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for part 2 of our discussion. With that, we say goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.